Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start our video about a character you're pretty familiar with. Spoiler, she came in for a short haircut. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. The time a couple of my employees were extremely mad at me for firing a disrespectful garbage waitress. This happened a couple years ago, but I randomly was thinking about it and thought you guys might get a kick out of the ridiculousness. I had this employee who was a woman in her late 30s or early 40s and was your stereotypical mombi. I'm a good deal younger than her, and at the time I was like 26 or 27. Right away, it became clear that she had an issue answering to a woman much younger than her. She talked back a lot and made it clear she felt like she knew more than me, but shouldn't have to listen to me when she disagreed. She would frequently bring up the fact that I had no kids and she had 4 to disregard my management abilities, as if that was in any way relevant. Here's just a couple anecdotes of what I regularly dealt with from her. We had a problem with employees being on their phones excessively, her being one of the worst offenders. I did an employee meeting where I reminded everyone they weren't allowed to be on their phones at all, and we'd be a lot more strict about that moving forward. She interrupted my speech to say, well, the problem is your generation can't handle being off their phones for more than 2 minutes. I pointed out that she was on her phone all the time too, and her reply was, it's different. When I'm on my phone, I'm looking at things for my kids, not trying to hook up on Tinder or play Candy Crush. I told her the reason people were on their phones didn't matter, unless it was an actual emergency, and she rolled her eyes. She tried to argue with me about the fact I would only schedule her during the day and not nights. Nights are more lucrative because customers buy more alcoholic drinks, thus higher tips. I reminded her that when she took the job, she was signing up specifically for day shifts, and most of my waitresses are college students and have class during the day, so there's not any flexibility with their scheduling requirements. She proceeds to yell at me that her desire should trump theirs because she's a mom and she needs more money than them, and slammed my office door shut behind her when I wouldn't cave. The final straw was that I heard from one of the waitresses, who I'm very close to, about how she would talk about how she didn't respect me as a manager and often brought up my lack of desire for kids. She would also apparently say things like, I'm not going to take orders from someone who hasn't even matured past the I don't want kids phase. Between the constant, blatant disrespect and the fact that she was barely a passable waitress anyway, I decided to fire her. 2 waitresses confronted me, telling me it was wrong of me to fire her and begged me to give her her job back. They had no defense for her crappiness, only she has 4 kids. If she has 4 kids dependent on her, it's on her that she repeatedly treated her boss like total crap. It's not like I fired her over one incident. There were countless instances of horrid behavior and blatant disregard for authority that she openly and shamelessly stated was rooted in ageism and my maternal status. So yeah, it's a shame that her kids had to suffer for their mom's behavior, but that's her responsibility, and I have no regrets for throwing out the trash. I feel like there are 2 possible outcomes. It'll be a wake-up call for her to get her crap together as she hits rock bottom, or she'll continuously blame others for her own predicaments and never improve. And our second story. Bag of nails. I'm a dry liner, which means I do a lot of moving around for my trade, as most of the work I do is toward the end of most projects. This means that I spend a lot of my time renting flats and houses for only short periods, usually about 6 months at a time. This has meant that I've had to deal with a lot of landlords over the years, both good and bad. When it comes to the bad landlords, I'll normally just walk away and get on with the moving to the next job and take the loss of my deposit and never use them again if I'm working in that area in the future. But this particular landlord got my back up so badly, I was not just going to walk away. I had managed to get myself onto a big job in London working on the new Wembley Stadium, so I decided I'd look for a house to rent rather than a flat, as I knew I was going to be working on it for a while, and found a reasonably priced, for London, house to rent from a private landlord in a local newspaper. I gave him a call and meet with him late that day. He seemed okay, went to view the house, paid him the deposit in cash, and moved in that weekend. I ended up staying in the house for nearly a year with no problems, always had the rent paid into his bank account on time, and fixed any small problems that might crop with the house myself without bothering him, up to the time when it came to moving out, only ever spoke to him twice on the phone after there was an issue with the heating that I was unable to fix myself, and he sent an engineer around the next day to fix the boiler. Come the time that the job was finished, I went round to the pawn shop that he owned to give him the notice that I'd be moving out the following month and to let him know that I was happy for him to come round and inspect the house before I moved out so that I could get my deposit back from him when I returned the keys. He never came round while I was in to inspect the house, so I assumed that he had come round to let himself in while I was at work, as I told him that I had no issue with him doing that if need be. So on the day I moved out, I went around the shop and handed him his keys back and asked for my deposit. His response was, "What deposit?" "The month's rent that I gave you in advance of moving in as a security deposit," I replied. He then told me he was keeping that to cover the cost of repairing damages caused while I was living in the property. I responded, "What damages?" With the bits of work and decorating I'd done on the house, it was in better shape now than when I'd moved into it. His response was to step forward, get right up in my face and say, "You're not getting it back, so F off." And he then gave me a shove, which needed me to take 3 steps back to avoid falling on my butt. Now, I'm what you would classify as average size and build, and this landlord had a good 4 inches on me height-wise and obviously spent some time down at the gym, and the wise move would be to back away and cut my losses. Now, before I was a builder, I was a member of the British Army in a regiment called the Royal Green Jackets, and they had trained us that the best way to proceed when confronted with aggression is to meet it swiftly and with much more violent aggression. So without even thinking about it, I started to move forward with the full intention of dropping this jerk quickly and painfully. After the first step, though, a thought popped into my head like a bolt from the blue, so I stopped and took a moment to examine the idea from a few different angles, said, "Okay, bye," to my now ex-landlord and walked out of his shop. What the landlord didn't know was that I had a spare back door key cut when I had lived in the house, which I had stashed in my van in case I ever lost the keys, so I could still get back in. So later that evening, I let myself back in and decided to stop for one last night before leaving in the morning for my next job, which was in Scotland. I spent the last night in the house carefully removing every bit of wood in there. I took down doors, removed skirting boards, banisters, and floorboards, being extremely careful not to damage anything. I also completely dismantled all the kitchen units, took up the wood flooring and carpets. I then left everything in nice, neat piles in each room. I got in my van the next morning and was preparing to start my drive when I decided I wanted to rub a little more salt into my ex-landlord's wound. So I stopped at his shop on his way out of London, got a spare hammer, screwdriver, bag of nails, and a box of wood screws out of the back of my van and went into the shop. My ex-landlord was not there, probably for the best, so I left the tools with his confused-looking assistant and told her to tell her boss, "You'll be needing these," and left for my drive north. I had my phone switched off while driving, and a few hours later, while I was having a bite to eat in a service station up by Nottingham, I decided to switch it back on and was greeted by a string of text messages and some very colorful voice messages, which left me chuckling to myself. Edit. I did reply to one of the texts he sent me. The text was, "Do you think you're effing funny, leaving me nails and screws?" I responded, "Yes." Hopefully the bag of nails were all a bit short and thin, and the screws were all just big enough to crack the wood unless you drilled a pilot hole. Hammer missing a wedge, and the screwdriver with a rounded-off tip. And our last story. Entitled Ken yells at restaurant's owner. This happened over the end of the summer in my hometown, a little city in central Mexico. First of all, 2 nights before this happening, my city got hit by really strong winds. We hadn't seen anything like it before. The wind tore up some trees, billboards, fences, and in my house, it tore up a plastic dome we had in the middle of our roof. It was a hard night because we had a literal hole in the middle of the house and it was raining. We had to cover it up with a giant tent, while also throwing out buckets of water off the lower floor and making sure nothing important got wet. After having spent the next day repairing and cleaning everything, my parents decided to relax for the weekend by going to eat at one of our favorite places. So we were in this restaurant, but it was clear that it also got hit hard by the winds. The restaurant's basically a giant terrace, so it's pretty much outdoors inside the city. Upon entering, I noticed the owner on the floor next to the bar fixing some stuff, He was wearing working clothes and was full of grease and stuff, so if you didn't know him already, you'd think he was a worker in the restaurant. He's pretty chill and kind, always greets regulars, and goes from table to table asking if everything's okay. The place is like casual fancy and one of the best in the city. This is where the entitled man shows up. While we were eating, there was a blackout because workers of the electrical company were fixing a damaged power line nearby, so the TVs and the music went off. And this entitled man started whistling and screaming for the restaurant staff to do something. Then the owner approached him and said that they'd fire up their backup generator and that please he be quiet in the meantime because it was no place to be causing a scene. The EM went ballistic because he thought a worker was shushing him. So, the usual. He hit the owner with the classic, "Do you know who I am?" He was yelling and telling him that he knew the owner and that he was going to get him fired and the like. That he wanted to speak to the manager because he was paying a lot for the service being so crappy. Obviously, him knowing the owner was a blatant lie because he was in front of him, just with working clothes. And the entitled man was probably trying to show off because at his table there was another man and two visibly embarrassed women. The whole restaurant went quiet because most of the customers are regulars. My city's a popular vacation spot, so this is like a hidden restaurant that only locals know. I only saw the owner as a gentle giant because he's effing huge and pretty cool. But he got as red as a tomato and started yelling at the guy. I've never seen him like that. I'm roughly translating what the owner said. His choice of words were interesting. Spanish is such a beautiful language to tell someone to go F themselves. He told the entitled man that he owns this effing restaurant and that he's not welcome anymore. Please pick up your companions and get the F out of there. The owner told him that he didn't care a flying F who he was and that he didn't want his effing money. He just wanted him gone. The entitled man was curled up in his seat being yelled at by the huge man. He stood up after that and quickly went to the exit, while yelling F you when he was at a safe distance. When it was all over, the owner apologized to everyone in the restaurant and offered some free drinks and snacks. Like I said, he's a pretty cool guy. By the way, we were without electricity for like 5 minutes. I love it when the entitled scream for the manager or owner and then get owned by them. This owner didn't stand for any bullcrap. I wish more acted like him. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.